Good evening, everyone. It's great to be able to come back to you tonight on Wednesday night. We hope that you've had a great day, and we're excited to be able to bring a message to you this evening. I've got my wife, Debbie, with me tonight. It's great to have her. So, welcome to the program. And we're going to talk about some things that, we've been in this mode of coronavirus obviously for a while now, and we're still kind of dealing with it, figuring things out. But I started thinking about something, and I thought we need to kind of get back to normal as much as we can and project some things that I believe that will put us back in that vein of normalcy. So I started thinking about this. I started thinking we've been in what do you call that, where you're in the house quarantined?
Lockdown.
So we've been in lockdown, quarantine, those kind of things. And I started thinking, that means that husbands and wives are in lockdown together. And so I wanted to kind of remind everybody of a little story back years ago when the girls were at home and they got ready to move out, and Bree was getting married, and then, of course, Lauren was moving out. And we would go by the rooms and look in the rooms, and they weren't there any longer. And so then it was like, it's us. It was like, it's just us.
Hello.
Yeah. And so it kind of freaked me out because, I hear I'm used to my kids bouncing around and, talking to them throughout the afternoon, the evening, those kind of things, watching TV together. And then it was just us. And that was an adjustment. It wasn't that I didn't love you and don't love you, I do, but it was like an adjustment of kind of like, it's just us.
I think I went through that prior to Lauren moving out and Bree getting married, wondering, okay, what is this going to look like?
So then we started. We was able to, fortunate and blessed to be able to have the home in South Carolina, and we started going. And usually we would take somebody with us. It would be one of the kids or a friend, a guest, whatever, family member. And then you wanted to go, and we would go for a week. And then you convinced me to go for like 10 days. And admittedly, and I've said it, it always gets a laugh, but I was serious about it. I started thinking, 10, 12, 14 days, 2 weeks with just me and you? That's like quarantine, right? So I started thinking, that thought at the time, it just kind of terrified me.
You're not supposed to be in fear.
Well, yes, I agree. But it wasn't you. It was just like being just us. And when your life is filled with other people in it, it tends to, you tend to get used to that. And then all of a sudden it's just you and your spouse. And so I had to make that adjustment. And then we went, and it was an adjustment. But the more that we did that, and the more that we would go and spend time, it was, with just me and you, I got to the place to where I started just to love it. I started.
I'm glad.
Glad to hear that. So it was really cool because then I learned different routines, and I learned how to deal with things. And then it to be perfectly honest, it caused, in my opinion, our marriage was great, but it caused our marriage to be even better because it forced us, so to speak, to kind of deal with each other and talk a little bit more and be involved with each other's lives a little bit more because we didn't have the noise of other people around us. And so that's kind of like what's been going on here. People, I imagine now, if you've got kids and you're at home with your kids, then you're like, I got all this going on. But if it's just like us, for the most part, now you're quarantined with your spouse, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, it can be a really good thing. So I thought it was a good idea. Let's get back to normal if we can, as much as we can, and start talking about some things that affect us beyond this, even though the coronavirus has put us in this kind of mindset to where we have to consider these kind of things. So I want to talk about marriage, and I want to talk about the covenant of marriage, and then if we have a little bit of time, I would love to also get into the subject of the taboo subject of sex and marriage. So this is going to be an interesting little session that we're going to have here, and we're hopeful that as you're watching right now that you'll comment, keep giving us comments and likes and shares and those kind of things, so that more and more people will get to hear some of these things, because I believe that it's really relevant, and marriage is such an important issue, and dealing with all of this, we definitely need to draw closer rather than, like wanting to kill each other. So,
You didn't say that.
yeah, I did. So, you ready? You want to jump into this?
So let's go right ahead.
Let's jump into this. So, let's talk about a few things scripturally first. Let's jump into one scripture I want to talk about and remind everybody. Then we're going to talk about some things about the covenant of marriage and how and why it can work and how it can work for you. So, watch this. Matthew chapter 19, verse 3 through 6. It says, "The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and he said unto them, Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female?" Now that should tell us a lot. I don't have time to get into that, but male and female. "And said, For this cause shall a man leave a father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh." So in other words, he's saying when somebody goes into the covenant of marriage, they're no longer two. There's no two competing ideas. There's no one going one direction, the other going the other. They become one. Now that doesn't mean they don't have different opinions on some things and they have to work that out, but what one gets affected by, both get affected by.
Right. And it's not just a single, solitary, selfish, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that,
Right.
without considering your partner.
Exactly. So he goes on here, he says, wherefore they are no more two, but one flesh. What therefore, now watch this, God has joined together, let not man put asunder, and that word asunder means separate. So don't let a man separate what God has joined together. And so when the bond of marriage is created, when you go into that and you make those commitments, it's not so much a piece of paper. Yes, I know there's a legal thing, to do. We have to go through that, and we understand that. But the commitment of a marriage is not just, it shouldn't be just because it's on a piece of paper for the government.
It's of the heart.
It is of the heart, but it's also a commitment before the Lord.
Yes.
And so the commitment before the Lord is He's the one that has joined this together, and don't let a man pull it asunder. But there's so many marriages that are failing, and it is heartbreaking, because a marriage, for people to go through a divorce and it's not that we understand it happens, and it's not that the people are bad people or anything like that. We understand sometimes things just happen. But a divorce of a marriage is, frankly, it's like a death.
It is, and it affects not just the two people involved, but everyone involved around them.
Absolutely. So I started thinking about this, and I thought, well, how do you make a marriage succeed? And here's, my mind works in different ways. Sometimes it's sports analogies. The sports analogies have gone for me because there's no sports happening right now, and people might be going, amen, hallelujah, no sports. But also my mind tends to be very business-minded. I'm a very business-minded person. And a marriage is also like borrowing money. Now, I know that sounds
Okay.
confusing. Everybody's like, how does that? How are you going to connect the dots here? Well, let me just say it like this. When a lender decides to lend money to someone to make, let's say, a house purchase, we tried that in the past of just lending 100% or almost 100%. And the problem with that is this: there is no skin in the game. And so when trouble comes, it's pretty easy to cut bait and run.
Bail.
And you can bail the marriage, you can bail the investment, you can bail the house, because in your mind, I really don't have anything to lose. I don't have anything investment. That's why the banks want you to put a 15-20% down payment, because then you have skin in the game. Now you have something that you are invested in, and you won't leave it easily.
Right.
it's the same way with a marriage. If you're not invested into it, then it's easy to run when trouble comes or when there's tough times and challenges. And we've been married almost 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So through almost 30 years, we've saw our share of trouble.
We have. There have been difficult times. But I think when people get married today, unless it's a godly commitment, they think, and some have even said, if this doesn't work out, we'll just get a divorce. No, you need to work at making it work out.
Well, there you hit it perfectly, because that's where the investment comes in. The investment comes in the fact that when you've chosen to be married to someone, you make that commitment to the Lord, because then the covenant comes into play. It's not just a piece of paper that you did outside, at the courthouse, but it's a covenant before the Lord. There's your investment. Your investment is that you have made a commitment to the Lord to do everything that you can to make that marriage work. And I suspect that when God created Eve, he saw Adam. We don't have time to go back and look those scriptures, but you can on your own. But you can see when God created Eve, he was concerned that Adam needed a companion.
Right.
And so he made Eve, which, interestingly, he didn't make another man for Adam.
Right.
He made a woman so they could reproduce, and he made the companion to be a woman that would be able to connect with the man, not only physically, but also that they would be compatible and they would share things and they would grow together. But I sincerely doubt that God ever had the intention that there would be a divorce between Adam and Eve.
Right. I think that if people concentrated or thought about just the image of God watching you in your marriage and God looking down and with approval or disapproval, I think they would be more careful about how they handled their marriage.
And the responses to the situations they get involved in. So when we talk about covenant, I want to use an example here, and I know it's not a marriage example, but it's a covenant example. And so please don't read into when I use this that somehow or another I'm saying I'm using this as a reference for a marriage reference. It's a covenant reference, but covenant applies to lots of things,
Yes.
marriage as well. But I want to show you something in covenant. In 1 Samuel 18, verse 3, the Bible says that Jonathan and David made a covenant because Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So Jonathan's covenant, and we won't go back and look at all that, but it was a time when King Saul, Jonathan's father, was searching and trying to kill David. And Jonathan made a covenant to protect David, and he honored that covenant because it meant something to him. It meant that no matter what, he made a vow to protect David, and he was going to stick with that vow. And then David made a vow in the covenant to Jonathan that he would always look out for Jonathan's family, and that came to pass even after Jonathan's death through his son Mephibosheth.
Yes.
And so he took care of his son after Jonathan's death, and so they honored their covenant. And that's the point that I wanted you to see. And so many times we hear about situations, and listen, don't read into this saying that I'm condemning you. If your marriage didn't work and you ended up getting divorced and you got remarried, please don't take that as condemnation. That is not how this is meant. This is meant, we understand things happen, and for whatever reason, stuff sometimes just don't get resolved for whatever reason. Usually I found in almost every case, it's never just one person's fault. It's almost always, not say there isn't a few examples of that, but usually there's two people that need some adjustment in their thinking to save a marriage. But here's what I want you to see. In Malachi, you should just never callously want to walk out of something. Malachi chapter 2, verse 13 says this, "And this have you done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regards not the offering anymore, or receives it with good will at your hand. Yet you say, Wherefore? Because the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously. Yet is she your companion and the wife of your covenant. See, the Lord is saying you shouldn't be dealing treacherously with your wife or with your husband, because they have been the wife of your youth or the husband of your youth. And we should always reference and look back that, things are going to change. There's going to be some things that are going to happen that, that are going to change. When you get married, many times there's this mad love. You just you love it so much, can't stand to be away from them. And then you get married for a little while, and you go, sometimes people think, well, I can't stand to be with you, and, because you get to know each other, and sometimes you need a little space and things like that. But that doesn't mean that you don't love them.
No, you're going to have differences of opinion and different ways of viewing different things, but that doesn't mean that I never want to be with you. It means that we have a difference of opinion.
Yeah.
And we'll work it out. We'll talk it out. We'll work it out. We're not going to slug it out, though.
Yeah. And I think what happens also is people have the wrong idea of what love is.
Right.
Because many people think that love is a feeling. And if the feeling is not as strong as it used to be, then therefore you must be falling out of love, and therefore you must not have love for that person and must not want to be married to that person any longer. And see, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Love is not a feeling. Now, you can have a feeling in love, and there is that, and especially early on, those feelings are tend to be stronger because you're developing the relationships. But even later on, you can still have the feelings, but you shouldn't judge whether or not that the marriage is worthy of continuing based on just a feeling. Sometimes, to be perfectly honest with you, love is a decision that you just have to make and say, wait just a minute, I married this person a long time ago, and I made a commitment, I made a covenant with that person, and I'm not changing that. And I actually even was kind of recalling, the time that our church has heard me through the years mention this. You remember when I came home the one time and I just said, man, I had a revelation from God.
I do.
It was like such a powerful moment. The Lord spoke to me. He was talking about the prodigal son, when the prodigal son had left, and then he came to himself, and he came back, and the father, who is represented in that story as God, and the prodigal son is one of us who has left God and came to his senses and came back. And when he came back, the father saw him coming, and he ran to him, and he fell down at his feet, and just began to love on him. And the son was ready to make this commitment, this confession of everything he did wrong, and he tried to make it, but the father didn't even let him get it all out. And he stops him, and he tells his servants, he says, go get a robe, go get the best robe and put on his back, and go put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. Now, if you just looked at that story from a natural perspective, you might have thought that was really all there was to it. He's got a tattered robe, his shoes are wore out, and he needs a ring. But it's far, far more reaching than that.
Yes.
Far more reaching. The Spirit of God spoke this to me, and all I can tell you is it was like unbelievable. It was like...
I love this revelation.
Yeah, it was like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it like this. And I love that those times when revelation, it's because that's what revelation is like, I've been reading it and looking at it for years, and I never saw it, and then all of a sudden I see it.
Yeah.
And so the Spirit of God spoke to me, and he said this. He said, there's a lot more to that story than what you're allowing yourself to receive. He said, the robe is a representation of the robe of righteousness that is referenced in Isaiah 61. He said, so when I said put a robe on his back, it meant that he'd been unrighteous. He had separated from me. And now that he had repented and confessed his sins and had the heart to even do it, he didn't really even get to finish it, but he had a heart to do it.
Right.
God said, now representatively, I'm putting the robe of righteousness on you, and therefore you are now in right standing with me again. And he said, then put a ring on his finger, and the Spirit of God spoke to me right there as I was driving down the road, and the Spirit of God spoke to me, and he said, what does your ring represent? And immediately I spoke it out. I mean, I was in the car by myself, but I spoke it out, and I said, covenant. And the Spirit of God said, that's right. That ring is a symbolic gesture of your covenant with your wife. And he said, so now you've been separated from your covenant with me. See, that's why that marriage is very similar to your relationship with God. And so he's like, you've been separated from me, but now you're back in covenant with me, so put the ring back on. Now that ring says we're back in covenant together. We've got a new agreement. And then the shoes that he put on his feet was saying essentially, you've not been able to do the work. Now I put shoes on your feet. Now go back to work.
Yes.
So anyway, it was an amazing story, but the point that I wanted everybody to see is the ring represented covenant with the man, the son, and the father, and it's the same way with husband and wife. Covenant means we're together.
I love that revelation. I truly do, and it is amazing the way God shows you things of that nature. You know, you were talking about the girls moving out, Bree getting married, Lauren moving out with in a home actually, and it puts me in mind when we first got married. It was you and I, and we had things that we were doing at the time, but we had each other. And then Lauren comes along, and a couple of years later, Bree comes along, and it was no longer just you and I. We devoted our time to raising our daughters. And then when they left again, it was back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I think if a lot of people would recognize how they felt, the butterflies, what first attracted them, the excitement of getting to see the one that you love and care about. Mm-hmm. I think if people dwelt more on that than humdrum of everyday living, because right now I would categorize the way that we feel is comfortable. I'm comfortable telling you anything, you're probably the same. And it's a peaceful feeling to feel comfortable about a relationship. Yeah. That doesn't mean you stop doing it. Like the other day when the tuna fish came and you came home early, I'd been waiting on this tuna, and I was real excited because I know that you love tuna fish salad. So I'm trying to get this done, and you you come in early, and I'm opening up the can, and that's the first thing you say, oh, the tuna came. So I didn't get to surprise him with tuna fish salad because he was there while I was doing it. But it's that type of thing that, I don't know, it's just I wanted to please you by having tuna fish salad made.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that people have to realize is love means that I'm interested in pleasing you. And if both people would take that approach, most of the time, I'm not going to say every time because there are situations that we just don't have time to get into, but there are situations where it isn't that. But most of the time, it's just that, frankly, and I'm just going to speak plainly, most of the time people just get selfish. And they want what they want, and if we took the attitude of, I just want to please you, and both people said, I want to please the other one, we'd probably have a lot better world.
Yeah, and not this 50-50 stuff either.
There's no such thing as 50-50.
No,
it's not 50-50. It's
wholeheartedly.
100. It's like 100-100. Each person gives 100, then then you're going to be successful and things are going to work out. So with just a few minutes that we have left, I want to jump into the subject of sex. Because that's a big part.
You said that in church?
I know.
Ooh.
This is such a big part of marriage, but I think sometimes we get the wrong concept of it because people think that sex, is love, and sex is not love. It can be an expression of love, but it isn't, in and of itself, it's not love. Now, it can get to a place to where it's you expressing love for your spouse, but at the same token, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. And isn't necessarily that. And I'm going to say this, and I know we'll get some comments on this. I'm sure, probably playfully, and that's okay. You can send them on. But sex is really not the greatest experience in the world. It is a wonderful experience done in the right setting.
Yes.
Sex done right is wonderful because it's godly. God instituted sex. He instituted to where a man and a woman would experience sex, and it should be from an expression of love. And then there's obviously what comes from sex is the potential of reproduction and children, and so it is godly that God instituted all that. But it's not meant to be the greatest experience of your life. There are many other things that you could go through life and go, look, that is a great thing, but there's other things that are wonderful. The birth of your children,
Yes.
and watching them succeed, and people that you care about, watching great moments in their life happen. Your relationship with God, times of worship in God is just, I've had some of the most wonderful moments in my life to where I was in a moment of worship and those kind of times of revelation. It's just that so many people are seeking answers within like sex and thinking that this is going to like solve all their problems. And as wonderful as it is, it's only wonderful when it's done right.
Yes.
And if it's done outside of the context of marriage, or if it's done with the wrong gender, those kind of things only bring pain and difficulty.
Pain, shame, disappointment,
Yes.
low self-esteem.
Yes. But done right, when you do it right, it brings not only an enjoyment to your spouse partner, but it also brings joy to the Lord. I know that because He's the one that set it up. He's the one that constituted it. And as we come together in that context of marriage, because God is the one that recognized the marriage. And if God doesn't recognize the marriage, I know the state recognizes anything today, but for the most part. But that doesn't always mean that God recognizes it. And at least biblically, that's who I'm attempting to please. Now, we don't ever say anything with the intent of condemnation. We love everybody. It doesn't matter to me what kind of lifestyle somebody's living. We love you. We genuinely do. We don't say it in the means to make you feel bad. We just want to help you. We want you to be able to see, at least based upon the context of what the Bible says of how wonderful that life can be. And so, done right, it's a wonderful thing. I want to real quick read in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and I know I'm running out of time fast here, but I want to read this real quick, and we'll try to wrap this up as much as we can. So, he says here in verse 1, "Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render," now you can look at different versions. I'm reading that out of the King James, but we should know what that means. We'll talk about it in a minute. "Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband." So he's saying, give your spouse, husbands, give your wives sex, and wives, give your husbands sex at the times that are appropriate. He says the wife has not power over her own body, has not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband has not power over his own body, but the wife. "Defraud ye not one another, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourself to fasting, prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for the inconsistencies." And so he goes on about that, but that's really what I wanted to talk about just another minute, is this. Sex should be done with the intent as the partner, meaning your spouse, is in that moment that she or he, is feeling a little frisky, if we can say it like that. And it should never be done, and it should never be used as a weapon or a tool.
Right.
Now, what I mean by that is this. You're ticked off at your husband because he didn't do something exactly right, and so you withhold sex because you're going to teach him a lesson. That is not biblical.
It's not biblical, and it's not right.
Now, maybe you're irritated and you just, maybe y'all are not in a mood to be close. That's maybe different, but I'm talking about consciously you're trying to punish him, or a husband's trying to punish his wife for something, and so therefore he's withholding that because he's going to teach her a lesson, or she's going to teach him a lesson. These are things that are not okay. They're not meant to be used like that. He says that actually you can stop having sex for a time for fasting and prayer. But watch that. Notice that. He said, but afterwards, come back together again, or else you'll get tempted. And what happens is you'll get tempted by other things around you and with other people around you. Right. And so he's telling us that it is important for a married couple to have sex and to make sure that they are complementing one another and helping one another to fulfill that desire that, and I'd even go so far as to say this, the godly desire that God has instituted in us that is beautiful and wonderful in the context of the marriage, or else you'll get tempted and maybe get lured away.
Right, right. There's danger in using sex as a weapon. It's not a weapon, it's not a tool, it's part of a relationship.
Absolutely. I would just say this in closing. Make your marriage be two things. We've talked about two things. Take the time that you're still in your captivity, or whatever you want to call it. Your what do we call it? What was it a minute ago? What's the word?
Lockdown.
You're locked down. Your time locked up. Make sure you use that time with your spouse to recognize, wait just a minute. I'm in covenant with this woman, or I'm in covenant with this man, and I'm going to enjoy the time that I have with my spouse, and I'm going to just take that time to reassure them and love them and just enjoy their company as much as you can do. I know there's other things on your mind as well, but enjoy your company of your spouse. And then also recognize that the times that you have together, that it's due. He says give them due benevolence. So they are due a intimate relationship, just like you are due the intimate relationship with your wife. And so recognize the importance of that still in your marriage. And I'm going to say it doesn't matter whether or not it's a marriage that's been instituted for a year, been in force for a year, or almost 30 years. It's still important, and you still should be in those times of intimacy with your spouse to make sure that you share that. Amen?
Exactly. Can I add one afterthought? Mm-hmm. You spoke about divorce, and God does not like divorce. And I know things do happen. However, I would tell you that if you're in a relationship, a marriage, where you are being abused, God does not want you abused. And if you're being physically abused, get out.
Well, and I would say this, I'll add one thing to that, and then we'll close. Seek help from professionals or your spiritual mentors, people that can help you with that. It's possible that somebody can get help as well, that stop. But do not allow yourself to be in a situation where you're being harmed. And that's really, right, I think, the message. Right. The marriage still potentially could be restored, but things would have to happen in order for that to be the case. That person that is the aggressor would have to have a major lifestyle change, because God never, ever desires for a woman to be abused, or frankly, a man. True. A man True. To be abused by a woman, whether it be verbally or physically, those kind of things. So that's never the intent. As you can tell based on the things that we said earlier, that doesn't represent a marriage very well. So anyway, we're out of time. God bless you. Thank you guys for coming and watching this video on Wednesday night. We love you all. We hope to be back really, really soon in church and be able to congregate together. We're looking forward to that day. But until then, just know we're praying for you, and we love you, and we want to continue to encourage you with these video messages. So God bless you. Thank you for being with us today. Amen.